So friends, Dr. Richa Bajaj has given us a historical viewpoint with respect to feminism today, and she started the argument with emergence of certain factors in society in the 19th century, and that became a kind of phenomena when the 20th century was reached. And she came to the point of India's independence when legally women were supposed to be equal in their rights and in their envisioning. And but law, is one thing. It's a word. It's something that is written down in the Constitution. But how to work it in the real life? That's the question that Dr. Richa Bajaj raised in the presentation. And I think now one has to think about the present problems that feminism faces. It faced in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and in the 21st century. So these are the questions that Dr. Richa Bajaj will be telling us and involving us in the discussion in a very productive way. So over to you, Dr. Bajaj.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Prakash. So I was discussing the women's movement in post-independence period and how constitutionally having received the rights, this has not translated to the social life and has not in fact seen equality of women in all spheres of life. Of course, there were laws that were passed under the, for instance, the Hindu Code Bill in the 1950s, which equalized the social laws of marriage and property in favor of women. But overall, women's issues received, were relegated to the margins and receded in the background post-independence. There was in fact a report that came up. It was based on the World Conference of Women. So during the 4th World Conference of Women that was held in 1995 in Beijing, it was brought to light that in India, and I quote from this report, in India, while women have often been in the forefront in mass movements and their presence has not been felt strongly in structured decision making and institutions, unquote. So while women have been a part of mass movements, etc., their presence has not been felt in decision making and in institutions. So this is a report that came out in 1995 during a world conference. So where has what gone wrong, really speaking? I found that during this period, during the last, from 70s onwards, I would say 1970s or so, the identity politics became a major issue that, that all over. For instance, the dilemma of caste and gender, came up. Discrimination of caste, for instance, takes precedence over discrimination of gender. Right, and the caste identity reigns supreme over women and disallows unification as women. And I found this rather interesting, that a woman's self, comes to consciousness not as woman, but through the identity of the community that she belongs to. That she associates herself as belonging to a particular caste, community, ethnicity, tribe, and not as woman. And on this particular point, I found a quote from Simone de Beauvoir, very interesting and relevant, where Simone de Beauvoir says in The Second Sex, she's discussing basically the identity of a woman, and she importantly notes that a woman perceives herself as an extension of the male and therefore imbibes the perspective of the male. Unlike, she says, the American blacks or the Jews, women actually lack their own space also. They lack any concrete means through which they can organize themselves as a unit against their oppressors. What it means is that, you see, the blacks, lived in ghettos. You could say Harlem became the place where all blacks lived together. They formed their identity. They concretized their own relations. They found sustenance and strength by being unified as a group. The same was the case with Jews. But when we think of women, they don't live separately. They live, they are dispersed, among men. And here, I'd like to quote Simone de Beauvoir from the book. She says, and I quote, they are in fact, they as in women, they are in fact dispersed among men, tied by homes, work, economic interests, and social conditions to certain men, fathers or husbands, more closely than to other women. As bourgeois women, they are in solidarity with bourgeois men, not with women proletariat. As white women, they are in solidarity with white men and not with black women. I find this, unquote, I find this very relevant, because when we think of identity politics, when we think of India, for instance, the same could be applied. I mean, replace race with gender, replace race with caste, and you'll have the same sort of a thing. That a upper caste woman will identify with, will have solidarity with an upper caste man, and not with a lower caste woman, not with a Dalit woman. Again, an upper class woman will not have, will continue to have her solidarity with the upper class men, and not a proletariat woman. How do you react to that? Do you see a kind of a parallel between the two?
No, it's there common in all societies that women means that they're associated with the men, even grammatically speaking.
Right.
So there is a woman because there is a man.
There is a man.
And then that they are kept together as a category, and this isolates women from other women.
Right.
Even as at another level, this joins men from different castes and creeds. So this is a very serious point that is being made, and the culprit, of course, is the division. And maybe women have to develop a kind of selfhood, and that selfhood will connect them with other women.
Right.
Otherwise, they will be always defined by their association with men.
Male identities. So you find that, I think that women's movement suffers also because of these divisions that are deliberately created. Because they are not able to unify as women ever, because they are constantly being seen. They see themselves. I mean, it is so naturalized and imbibed that they see themselves as extension of a male identity, so or a family identity. So do you think that the answer to women's question comes from the fact only when they distance themselves from the identity that they have been given to them as subjects in a family, a household, a community, a province, a region, that unless they see themselves as women and not a part of other identities, they will not be able to forge ahead? Do you think that that is a question?
I think we have to consider in a serious manner the idea of selfhood. The woman is a person. The woman has a role to play. And if one woman has to make this role her own, then the same will apply to other women. So there will be a kind of community of women.
Right.
That's not identity at all.
But you see, you find today that there is a community of women, but there will be a Dalit community of women. There will be a proletariat community of women, working women, unorganized, organized sector. That there are unions also, which also turn into women's organizations. There are NGOs, etc. So all of these, they are still based on the class that one belongs to, or the particular caste that one belongs to. So gender is inextricably, in that sense, linked with other subaltern identities of caste, ethnicity, religion, or region for that matter.
So that is to be fought.
So do you think women's movement suffers because they constantly get subsumed in other movements, and women are not able to unify with one another because they do not identify with one another at the level of women, rather they identify with the community, ethnicity and tribe that they belong to?
I can ask a provocative question from you. When workers of the world can unite, then women also can unite. If men as workers unite, why about women? They also can unite all over the world.
Yes, but they don't. You see, class identity merges with all of these, and there is a complex framework that emerges from it. So, I think that we need to understand that women, both in the private spheres and in the public spheres, they have to constantly deal with dimensions of caste and dimensions of class. Both, and why I say class is because they have to deal with the economic angle, where they are placed economically in society. Caste, because caste is an issue in India. In fact, if you were to ask, if you were to see what is the point of unification, you'd find that how caste in fact becomes a kind of a logic that women have to deal with.
No, the context is also of patriarchy. In patriarchy, both men and women are involved. And if they fight together against patriarchy, a social institution, then I think some kind of solution can be found. What do you say?
No, I think that we need to, what I found was that the issues of post-1990s, for instance, feminism in India, when we think of a discourse towards this kind of feminism in India, we need to look at the private spheres of family and reproduction from the point of view of women. And the public space of labor, where working women are concerned or women workers are concerned, laws and governance and decision making is concerned. We need to look at all these, from the point of view of women. We seem to look at them from the point of view of a particular class or caste or ethnicity. I think we need to look at them from the point of view of women. Again, domestic violence, oppressive households, traumatic childhood, talk about sexual abuse at home, poverty, the responsibility of siblings, as I said, mentioned. All these are issues that women have to struggle with in their everyday lives. So I think by focusing on, for instance, not on these, but on focusing on the experience of the tribe, it immediately derails and becomes a part of another movement. And in order to be able to build a successful Indian women's movement for the 21st century, I think it is important to discuss gender from, or discuss all these categories through the prism, through the point of view of a woman.
Gender is a definite no-no. But you know what I believe is that women have to be seen as woman citizens. Is that possible? That you know that there are citizens in the country, and there is a section of women who are also citizens of the equal kind. So let them be considered as citizens. Let them be considered as having selfhood, and that they have decisions to make. Those decisions have to influence them, and also men are at the same time, and that finally that they are a part of the overall society to which they belong.
So again, the point of citizen, as you say, is you know, it becomes problematic because they are citizens. They were given the title. They were, I mean, officially they are citizens, but actually they are not. And I'm saying actually they are not because probably the women's movement is not strong enough. But how do you make women's movement strong enough? Because you will make women's movement strong enough when they need to exclude other identities and stick on to their own identity as women. You see, when we had to fight the British, it was very difficult to unify because we were such a diverse, it was a country which was diverse. You were first, you know, for instance, a Bengali and then an Indian for that matter. But how do you then, how did this country come out of that mold? That it unified itself as Indians first, right? And then looked at other. So I think in terms of prioritizing the identities that we live with multiple identities. But I think the women's movement suffers because they are not able to prioritize their women identity over every other identity, because they then they easily get derailed into other movements and start speaking from that point of view, and it also restricts them from unifying with women of other sections of society. So I think that is one of the points that I was trying to make through this discussion.
I'm just doing loud thinking. During the national movement, we were fighting a common enemy called imperialism.
Right.
So all of us got united, whether we came from this section or that section, this region or that region. All those things happened. But once the imperialism left, and some kind of a common enemy has now to be invented.
It has to be invented. So again, my question is, who is women's common enemy? Is it patriarchy or what?
It's patriarchy, it is capitalism. That also is a common enemy.
Yes, since you mentioned capitalism, I'd like you to also look at some of the new kind of feminism enterprise that has begun. One of them is eco-feminism or environmental feminists, you know, who speak about, for instance, the effect of capitalism in today's society, and you know, they you know, in fact these are different movements. There is also the queer movement, for instance, that challenges a kind of a heterosexual patriarchal setup, right? Because and they become natural allies of feminism, all ecology, etc. Because you see what for instance eco-feminists say is that, you know, we need to counter the capitalist enterprise, because there are these dangers of capitalist masculinity which tries to impose itself on forests, like it imposes you know, itself on women. So women and forests are viewed together, and the capitalist men see both forests or the natural resources and women as resources to be exploited for the monetary value that they hold, and turn it into private property. Right. So I think the logic of environmental feminists and you know, eco-feminists such as Vandana Shiva, or environmental feminists like Beena Agarwal, they've mentioned how this needs to be countered together. Like in today's context, you cannot speak of patriarchy without referring to capitalism, according to them, because the two merge, because the new culture, you know, and this also brings us to new cultural responses, for instance, of consumerism and liberalization, you know, in the era of consumerism and and liberalization in this sort of a post-globalized economy, there is a glorification of the objectification of women. You know, think of the beauty pageants that we have, where you have Miss, congeniality and Miss that and Miss this. In fact, there was when during the 1990s when this kind of Miss Beauty contest began in Bangalore. There was this protest where women came out with placards saying Miss Hunger, Miss Poverty. Suggesting that, what is it, a mockery of women's movement, because you are trying to have a beauty model which is based on her characteristics, or the best body and the looks or whatever, or elan that this woman has, while you should be looking at the other side of the picture, where women have to constantly deal with malnutrition, and deal with objectification, and deal with hunger and poverty. So I think in the present context, the role of eco-feminists or environmental feminists have tried to weave this kind of the movements together against a kind of a capitalist masculinity, and in favor of a kind of a more democratic space. So I think if women today are fighting for their democratic rights, that in itself fulfills their purpose, because then there you're looking at a space which is democratic, where in fact all other identities would also find space, other subaltern identities. The moment you make it a feminist enterprise, then it looks like it is entirely focused on women. It also appears like you want to not have patriarchy, but in its place have a sort of a matriarchy. You're trying to replace and topple the patriarchal system and bring in a woman-centric system. But I think if we were to only bring in a sort of a democracy which is open to, which looks at critically at consumerism and the new culture of post-globalized economy, and looks critically at also heterosexual relations. You see, I think all these queer movements are also natural allies to women's movement, because they are constantly trying to challenge this kind of heteronormativity in society. So because you see, what is heteronormativity based on? It is based on man-woman relationship in marriage and family. So you are trying to give the base of the family as a kind of a heteronormative family, where the patriarch, so heterosexual is inevitably patriarchal. So when you challenge heteronormativity, you have actually also challenged patriarchy, which these queer movements do, and which is why there is a lot of hue and cry against giving any kind of a legal sanction to these kind of relationships, queer relationships, because they topple the patriarchal system, and because they topple the patriarchal system, they become natural allies of feminist movements in India as well.
Suppose I say that all these things that you have pointed out are symptoms of a malaise, and that if the malaise is identified, then people can get together, men and women as citizens can get together and fight. The only thing is that the common enemy is to be understood. That common enemy, according to you, is capitalism, which produces certain kinds of males and also women as objects. If this is understood, and if you start working against it in some form or the other, maybe political, maybe cultural, maybe social, and if the three can be combined, then some kind of a solution can be found.
You see, I think we are dealing, as far as women's movement is concerned, we are dealing with patriarchy. But as I said, women's movements cannot be understood in isolation, because for so long women have seen themselves as extension of males and of identities that their families have given them, and also the experiences that they have had. For instance, if you look at caste politics, etc. So, so these experiences in a way will always create divisions, that you don't understand what it is to be a black subject, for instance, or you don't understand what it is to be a Dalit subject, for instance. So I think there are oppressions that take place at those levels as well. The point is that they are not able to come out of or forge an identity which is a woman-centric identity. The question is whether they should. The question is, should they leave aside all their identities and forge a woman-centric identity? If they do so, then what are the perils involved, of such a system? That when are they negating their responsibility towards the community and identity? For instance, if I speak of a Dalit subject, is the Dalit subject in prioritizing her woman identity, relegating or receding or being dishonest to one's caste identity? So which identity should you choose, right? So again, the answer for a lot of feminists lies in intertwining and to see the linkages and to talk about all of them together, right? The only answer that appears then in this such a situation is when you have these multiple identities that are calling forth and are asserting their rights in this space, is democracy in its true sense and is in its essential sense, where each section of society has a dignified, equitable space to occupy in society. And democracy actually challenges the power dynamic that exists today, whether it is capitalism or patriarchy, because the moment you've brought in democracy, you have, and if we were to, I say that if we were to just bring in what the Constitution says, equality of the sexes, that would be fine. Equality of all genders, equality of all caste groups, but in actuality, that has not happened, right? So I'm just trying to understand why it has not happened. It has not happened because it has not happened for several other movements, right, including caste groups or several other tribal groups. It has not happened for many other groups, and therefore we say that the vision of the national movement may have received the sanction from the state, but it has not come to light. It has not been implemented in this manner. The question is why.
Mass education, spread of mass education, asking questions, interrogating everything, doubting everything.
This also, I also have this thing that yes, education is the key to it, right? Right. The more women think about these issues, the more they discuss these issues, the more they question their surroundings, they are going to come out of whatever rigmarole society has brought us in. But also, how far is economic independence of women important? Do you think there is, and I don't mean women actually, I would say that it is for the dignity of any human being, is it not important to be economically independent, that you should be able to live off yourself, whoever you are, whatever gender you be or group you are or person you are?
Well, I think all these questions have to be shared, have to be discussed, have to be worked out, and that's where women's role also is constituted, that they should learn to ask questions, and they could ask questions with courage, with conviction.
So on Women's Day, what do you think is the next step for women in India?
To talk and talk, to complain, to doubt, to protest. That's the answer in my opinion. What is your answer?
I think it is to be also to be self-critical from where you come. Actually, you don't have to be self-critical. The world is already so critical of women. I think we should be nice to ourselves. So maybe not be so critical of ourselves. Be less critical of ourselves. Yes, but yes, unto ourselves we need to understand what to prioritize, which identity to prioritize. Maybe we can juggle with different identities and keep all identities intact. But I think we should. What I think is important and what is a strategic step for women is to find allies, in whoever they can. If there is another woman from another caste group or another culture group, rather than denouncing, find another country, yes, another region, continent, whatever, continent, but try to make more friends than enemies, and try to win more friends than enemies, because then you are strengthening your movement, which is the which is what women's movement requires, and playing it, and I think that's the strategy I think women should take up.
Friends, very well, Dr. Bajaj has raised questions, has tried to answer them, and all the answers that she is supposed to be giving are open-ended answers. So one has to experiment further. There will be new questions, new things, and maybe in the coming year, the next this World Day for Women, we will be more clear than we are today, and let's struggle forth. So that's the conclusion that Dr. Bajaj has suggested, and I think it's a valuable conclusion for all of us. I hope, friends, you have enjoyed the talk, the points that Dr. Richa Bajaj made, and you have to consider further and keep considering on and on. Thank you.